Awesome. Thank you so much, Kira. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Women in Enterprise Sales Forum. My name is Jessica Lynn. I'm a co-founder and partner at Workbench, an enterprise VC fund here in New York. We invest in enterprise software startups throughout the country at seed stage, and we love talking to early enterprise startups. So please do send them our way. But here at Workbench, we've been extremely passionate about women enterprise, as I like to call it. And a big part of that stems from our personal experiences, just not seeing a ton of women enterprise software. So you'll see here on the slide, we at Workbench have spent the past 8 years bringing together this awesome community of women here in New York City and beyond, across founders, operators, execs, VCs, with dedicated workshops, meetups, dinners, and more. And you can see here our first ever Women in Enterprise Summit we hosted back in 2018 called Navigate, where we had 250 plus women speakers from Slack, New Relic, Bank of America, and more. It was so phenomenal, and we'd love to bring that conference back soon. But in the meantime, the genesis of today's forum topic was inspired largely by one of our newest Workbench portfolio companies called Pronto, as they are building a platform that supercharges partnerships, channel, and alliances teams. And while we've talked a lot about traditional enterprise sales in this forum series, we noticed that not as much attention goes to partnerships teams. So we're going to fix that today. We're so pumped for today's session and for all of you with us. We have 3 boss women from partnerships here to share more about their own career paths, how they think about the ever-changing world of partnerships, and most importantly, for each of you to take one tactic on playbook page to try back at home. And for folks who can stick around for 10 minutes at the end, we'll break up into smaller breakout rooms with each of the speakers so you get a little bit more group time. Before we dive in, I would love to turn it over to our awesome partner for today. So Sarah Davis, who's the head of marketing at Pronto, to share a little bit more about Pronto and the incredible work they're already doing with partnership teams at companies like Red Hat, Juniper, Sisense, and more. So over to you, Sarah.
Everyone, so great to meet you all. So excited to be here today. Not only these amazing speakers, but attendees. As Jess mentioned, I'm head of marketing at Pronto, and this topic of this webinar today is super important to us, really aligned with our mission of really just unlocking the value in partner ecosystems. Like Jess said, it's often an overlooked or misunderstood area of business. And what we're trying to do is build a platform that makes it much easier for those in BD, in partnerships and related teams to really prove the value and track everything and measure everything in a way that shows how much exactly you're delivering to the business. So for us, what that looks like is a unified platform that allows many teams to kind of come together and collaborate on everything from tasks to tracking sales leads to reporting on metrics and results of those work up the ladder. And so we are here to really eradicate the need for emailing very large files back and forth or updating your Excel sheet to quickly send off right before the QBR. Really just to have somewhere that's like a system of engagement and truth that's updated in real time, that's very easy for everyone to access and increases that kind of visibility and trust between partners. We're super excited to be a portfolio company of Workbench. We just announced our seed funding round, which they led a couple weeks ago, which is a huge announcement for us. And we're super lucky to count incredible companies like Red Hat here as our list of customers, and would be very happy if we could help support any of you all in your careers, in your teams, to just make partnerships something that sparkles in every organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah will also be here throughout the event. So please do ping her on chat. We also have her email here, sarah@gopronto.io, if you'd like to learn more about Pronto. Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So with that, let's kick off our panel. For anyone who's ever been to a Workbench event, we always have our signature icebreaker. And ours for today is, if you were not doing what you're doing in channel alliances and partnerships, what would you do? So with that, I'll jump in. First up, we have Terry Hall, who's the VP of Global Strategic Alliances at Red Hat. Terry has previously been a sales leader at all the top enterprise logos you can think of, Oracle, SUSE, more. Terry, what would you do if you were not doing this?
Well, I'd probably go back to my roots. If I hadn't pursued this career, I probably would have stayed in engineering and probably pursued something along the lines of NASA or SpaceX or Blue Origin, meet Bill Shatner. I don't know, something like that.
I love that that's your backup career, by the way. Next up, Jennifer Crane, Operations Director of West Partner Sales Org at Cisco, and so many great roles and orgs within Cisco. I'm a very proud Cisco alum myself, and I know previously at Hewlett Packard. Jennifer, what would you do?
Yeah, so I would be a FBI criminal profiler.
Oh my God.
I know I actually wanted to do it in high school. I'm still that person that watches the, the true crime shows and trying to figure out who done it. So that would probably be what I would get into.
I love it. So impressive. And last but not least, Julia Fair, who's SVP of Global Partner Ecosystem at BigID. Julia, previously in alliances and channels roles at Salesforce and Oracle too, such an Oracle mafia. So Julia, what would you do?
Different than these very exciting criminal justice and engineering careers. My weekends are spent in the garden. So landscape architecture, and frankly, I think that relates to partnerships anyway, because it's all about the ecosystem that you're cultivating. So that's what I do.
I love it. Very meta. I love hearing always how talented, multi-talented our panelists are. So, okay, with that, let's jump in. Everyone, please throw in questions on Zoom chat as we go along, and I'll take them live. So let's start first with some career talk, right? We've got incredible women on the call thinking about how you even break into such leadership roles. And there are, of course, many different paths to get into channel partnerships, but often we see folks coming from, let's say, the direct sales route. So maybe, Terry, we can start with you. You came from direct sales. Can you share what that jump was like going from direct sales to partnership sales, and what advice do you have for others who are looking to make a similar career jump?
Yeah, sure. So my path from direct sales to partnerships actually wasn't intentional. But so I'll explain that. So I was in direct sales. I was working for a semiconductor company. We were launching a new chip. We had a bunch of server customers lined up to buy the chip, but there was no software ecosystem yet that was taking advantage of the architecture. So I went to the president of my company at the time and said, "Hey, we really need somebody to work on this. Like, there's no operating system, there's no database that's 64 bits yet. Like, the stuff will run, but it's not going to really, take advantage of the technology." And he said, "Yeah, would you go do that, please?" So, one day I was leading a sales organization, and the next day I was building a software ecosystem around our technology. And that is literally how I got into partnerships. But even though that seems, maybe a bit random, I guess what the piece I would take away for people on the call here is, if you look for opportunities to solve a problem, or to, in my case, I wouldn't even call it solving a problem. I would call it leveraging an opportunity, right? We weren't going to fully leverage the opportunity. That's a great way to make a transition anywhere in your career, from anything to anything. So that's my thought.
Okay, I have more questions to come back to you, but maybe we'll jump to Julie and Jennifer real quick, which is, coming from, let's say, the partnerships world, and as you even now are hiring team members, what's the number one skill set you look for in team members you're bringing onto the partnerships team?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead first. I really look for someone that can tell a story, right? Someone that can see the opportunity with us, Cisco, and match that to what's the partner trying to accomplish, but not just, talk about profitability programs and, the more of the program or technology portfolio. It's about taking that and really creating the story to say, how do we leverage that to really impact the partner's business, and what's the art of the possible together? So to me, I'm always looking for that storyteller.
I like that, Jennifer. I think I'm kind of adding on to that. It's this creative problem solving. So I think about partnerships and partnering has evolved, and I've benefited. Terry and I have kind of opposites. I started, and my entire career has been in partnering in this world, and have seen it evolve in terms of the partners that are valued, and partnering being valued now within the C-suite and at the board level. But it's being able to work across different functional teams, be able to solve problems for the business, your own business as well as your partner's business. So it's creating value for a bunch of related constituents. I think that's it's part mediator, part sales, part there's engineering. There's a lot of different paths kind of that can get you there.
Yeah, it sounds like being a translator too, right? Between many different groups.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess, Terry, going back to your point, I'm always so curious when people make these transitions, like, how did you learn how to do the job, right? I'm sure there's still, of course, elements of direct sales, but like, just talk us through how you learned how to do partnerships.
That's a valid question. So again, I had an objective, but I guess I drew on my sales experience, right? Of what's the value proposition to the customer in this case. Okay, I'm going to go try to get all these software companies to get on board with me, with us in this new technology. What's the value in it for them, right? And so it was kind of taking the skills I already had, but learning that I had to apply them, in a different way, right? So it's kind of like what Jennifer was talking about, being that storyteller and being able to create a vision for these potential software partners of, look, if you invest in this, here's the market opportunity, here's what we can do together, here's the art of the possible, as Julia said.
Awesome.
And just, I want to add on that.
Yeah, please.
Okay, like I feel like people forget sometimes that our partners are just like customers, right? Like they want to grow revenue, they want to be profitable, they want to have a great customer experience, they want to attract and retain talent. Like the way you think about approaching a partner is very similar to how you think about, selling and approaching to a direct customer as well. And I think you kind of keep that at the core. You're just trying to help them solve their problems, right? And meet their customers, just like you would, your customer in the direct field.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful because I will say, even, myself coming from the enterprise world, I've always found channels and alliances and partnerships to be a little bit of a black box, right? I'm like, what goes behind these partnerships? We see, of course, all these flashy press releases, right? And so I would love, especially for anyone who's on the call who might be new or thinking about creating or starting a partnership, let's just like get really tactical, I think, and like walk through the playbooks of how do you do that. And I know all three of you have said even the dynamics behind partnerships have evolved a lot, even in the last few years too. So maybe let's start with, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is what I assume how you kick off a partnership, but my sense is like you, Terry, you see there's a problem to be solved, right? Or there's an opportunity. Right. So at the very start, you say, let's start with the goals of what a partnership would even mean.
That is key.
Exactly. Before you go picking who that partner is, what is the goal, right? And Jennifer, you're the one who said even earlier, it's not just profitability, even though I'm sure that's obviously a key part, right? As a revenue driver. So maybe could one of you talk through like how you even define these high level goals, maybe beyond just profitability, or how you think about that as a team?
So I think it starts with it's corporate, whatever the entity is, it's the company's priorities. So you're anchored. I talk a lot about being anchored in our company's priorities, our board's priorities. So understanding what those are, and your ecosystem and the motions or the work that you're doing waterfalls from that. It's in support or in service to that. And then the nuances, in addition to developing a strategy and goals within your partner ecosystem that support your corporate priorities, that what you're also working on is making sure that the partners that you're recruiting or cultivating there's some landscaping talk, the cultivating of partners, that the partners that you're cultivating are in cultivating them and developing them, they're along for that ride, that journey too. So they benefit. So there's a mutual value proposition that you're considering as well. So I think that's part of that balance.
Is it a pure math equation though? Like, do you and your teams just sit down and say, okay, let's be real. Let's assume if we partner with this person, there's 20% lifts on top line revenue for both of us. Like, what does those conversations behind closed doors sound like?
It's really more about the alignment, right? As Julia was talking about. I mean, if you take, I'll try to give a couple of really simple examples, like the one I was referring to before, right? We had a chip that was a new architecture. We needed software that would run on that chip, right? So, and they had the opportunity to significantly increase their performance and take advantage of, security things and other things that we built into the technology. So it was a win-win, right? There's clear alignment there. There's a benefit for them. If they come to us, if they get to be first to market, they're going to have an advantage over their competitors. if we can get some software on this platform, we're going to have an advantage over our competitors. And we did. And we took a ton of market share for the next 3 years from our mutual competitors. Another simple example, today I work for Red Hat. We're a software company. Partnering with global SIs or regional SIs who are very specialized around what we do, right? Around containers or around app modernization. That's a natural win-win, right? They want services engagements with their clients that they're going to grow, their clients' businesses, and we want to drive our software into those clients. So you look for those really, what are the points of intersection where are you truly, truly aligned? And if you're truly, truly aligned, everything else takes care of itself. The math just works.
Awesome. There's actually a question already in chat, and I'm just going to read it. Where there's already customer opportunity, a partnership is a no-brainer, right? So I think the examples you gave, Terry, are so spot on. But are there situations in which you would embark on partnerships without a customer need? Would you build a joint MVP because the two entities consider themselves strategic? So I guess the question is like, when it's less black and white, right? When it's less of a no-brainer for both sides, I think we all know there's partnerships where it's not equal, right? And all three of you, of course, have worked at some big giants. What happens when it's not that equal or not that clear cut?
I think you start also from looking at your gaps. So you've got those corporate strategies and you're looking at your corporate goals and what are your, as Terry said, your challenges to achieve those. And then those can illuminate partnership opportunities where you may not have a customer because of those gaps. So in partnership and through partnership, you're able to address those gaps, those go-to-market hurdles that you may have encountered without partnering. I think it starts there.
I think it's hard to really drive the partnerships in my personal experience when there isn't that like symbiotic relationship and you're mutually going to benefit from it. Because the other thing to think about with partner sales is it's not just about you wanting that relationship. You have to get a lot of people in the boat with you, especially at the field level, to participate.
Yeah.
And so I just find if you can't really clearly define, not only to the companies, but also to the team members in the field who really need to come together and make this happen, it is hard to get those types of partnerships going. So not that it can't be done, but I do think it can be harder because you need so many other people working on your behalf to maximize that partnership.
Well, I'm so glad you call that out because again, I think so many of us see partnerships as just press releases and you're like, oh, these two massive companies are coming together. But in reality, behind that press release are thousands sometimes, right, of sales reps out there, having to cross-learn and cross-manage and cross-sell, right? And so that's just a really, really good reminder. Okay, so let's move on. So we've already talked about like the high-level goals and how you even go about that. I'm curious when you identify partners, right? So you have the goal, you want to find the partners to achieve this goal. How do you find great partners given all of the companies out there, right? And we all only have 24 hours in a day. So you can't possibly have a partnership with everyone. I'm sure you get approached a lot by lots of companies who want a partnership with you. And then the second question I have is actually, how do you manage what we call frenemies or co-opetition, right? I know a lot of companies now, of course, have overlapping agendas. So how do you manage every partner's sometimes maybe competitive priorities?
I can start. Sorry. To the first question, I think we've kind of touched on it from a lot of different angles, which it's really about those points of alignment. And, but that sort of plays into your second question as well. Even with frenemies, right? And this is what this is something that if you are in partnerships, you continually have to educate your company about, because as soon as one of your partners announces something that's competitive or is going down, they all freak out and, oh, they're not our partner anymore. And it's like, no, they are our partner, but you just have to have really clear swim lanes, right? You have to be really clear. This is where we're going to compete and this is where we're going to collaborate. And as long as you do that, and I have just as successful partnerships with partners who have competing technologies as I do with partners who don't. It's just, you have to manage it in those swim lanes and be really clear about, how you're going to collaborate and where you're not.
And do you find that you have to do a little bit more selling internally to bring on the competitive ones?
It's more, it's not just selling. It's more just continually reminding people that, yes, they're competing with us over here, but they're driving all this influence or business or strategic value or whatever it is that we're partnering with them for over here. And we have to keep those two things separate.
Yeah. And in terms of, finding partners, Julia called it out, right? Like, what are we trying to focus on, or what's the goals of the company? And then therefore what partners play in there, right? So as an example, in the West business where I'm at, we're really starting to focus and double down on healthcare. So now we're saying, okay, if that's the case, how do we now go out and look for what ISVs are really impactful from a healthcare perspective? What's going on with their technology that might cause a need for our technology, and really looking through that. So it could be, just getting really crystal clear on what is it that we're hearing from our customers as a need. Therefore, who should we be considering from a partnership perspective? What's going on with them that might impact us? And then, it's not only looking at the big boys that are out there, but I do a lot of like trade mag reading to just see kind of who's popping up on the screen or names that I don't necessarily know, and then might go, start to do some research about them as a follow-up to, seeing them in an article somewhere.
That's so awesome. And both of you touch on, again, what you get out of that partnership. So let's move on then to how you make it successful, again, for hopefully both sides, right? I'm curious how you measure success, right? Of course, if there's revenue, that's great. And that's hopefully a little bit more clear cut, but you mentioned as well, Terry, strategic influence, right? And so how do you measure maybe like some of the softer parts of it, and what do you measure?
Yeah, that is a challenge. And, but it is something that I think that's one of the areas where we will continually always be evolving. We're never, because it is difficult to measure, we're never going to have perfect metrics, right? But it's so important because revenue is not the only metric, right? There's huge value in influence, and there's huge value in identifying early some of the movers and shakers that aren't movers and shakers today. Just back to what Jennifer was saying, like staying on top of who's emerging in these different spaces. They're not going to have a huge impact on your revenue today because they're not very big. But if they're thought leaders and they're really setting a trend, you want to start to engage with them. So I'm kind of drifting, but to say there are just so many facets of partnership besides bookings or revenue, and they're all important. And we try to measure them at least through some scorecard relative contribution sort of way, even if it's not a, true metric in the sense of revenue or something.
Jessica, we have, and I'm same as Terry, there's a litany of measurements, metrics that you can use. I think an executive dashboard or a board level dashboard, again, is tying into the priorities of the board, what's important to them. That being said, within our partnership teams, I think it's important you're looking at and you're developing the entire partnership journey, that partnership life cycle. So there's, the early onboarding a partner successfully, and there's ways to measure that. Then you're onboarding them, and then there's the getting them smart about who you are and how you can go to market together. So whether that's training, enablement, sandboxes, those kinds of things, and you can count those. Those are all things you can count, and therefore you can metric. Then you get into the pipeline development, demand generation, pipeline development. That tends to be where partnering, we tend to focus there on the middle. But I find that funnel work, top of funnel and funnel progression work, it assumes that there's work that's happened before. It also assumes there's work that happens afterwards, that you've got, especially for technologies like the companies I've worked with recently, complex software technologies that require integrations and implementations that can be long lasting. You want to make sure those customers are successful with your partners. So you've got partners there that are able to kind of catch your software wins and make those, see the customers through the value realization. And again, that's something that can be measured, but it really depends, back to corporate goals, what's important to your company at the time in terms of what you're going to dashboard up. But amongst the teams, you can MBO or count those things amongst your alliances teams to ensure success.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons why, we were so excited to invest in a company like Pronto, right? Because we heard from so many groups that, sometimes the ROI calculation feels like a black box or it's done manually, right? And it's like a number of your team members like crunching spreadsheets and again, reporting out, right? Because you do need the buy-in of so many people and so many stakeholders. So that's something that, I'm very passionate about, and I know so many on the call are. I love how you called out the funnel though, Julia, because again, I think people think, oh, I set up a partnership and boom, like revenue tomorrow, right? But there's so many parts along the way where things can go really well, but also if you don't keep an eye on them, they may not go as well. So maybe if each of you can really share quickly, like what part of this funnel when you're building this partnership would you advise people to watch out for most? What is, in your opinion, what's the hardest part? And again, I know every partner is different, but like just, anecdotally from your experiences, have you said, I need to keep an eye on that part because that has been challenging in the past? Maybe Jennifer, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'll start. So, and I totally agree with Julia. And, a lot of time we look at the revenue and bookings and all that, but I love the whole 40X mentality, right? Like there's the leading and lagging indicators. So like what's going to help really drive those leading indicators? I think one of the key things, in terms of like long-term stickiness, and I'm going to talk more like from a traditional partner perspective, I think partners investing in building services and services creation around your technology and them committing to that. And then not only committing to that, but enabling their teams to actually be able to go deliver that. If they're building that, that means that they're investing in you long-term. It's not going to be a one and done, type of deal where, it's more of just let's meet in the field, get the deal done and then move on. So I think the practice development, service creation, and then the enablement of their teams is what's going to ultimately drive that long-term pipeline development opportunity.
100%. Yep.
Cool. Julia or Terry, anything else you want to add about kind of gotchas or trip ups to watch out for?
Well, I think that's right. And I think kind of the secret sauce or one of the things we've seen is the interlock. So by default, we're interlocking with the go-to-market teams. Oftentimes partnerships sit in go-to-market teams. So you're interlocking with, and you mentioned Jennifer, field, and that's it. So you strengthen those relationships, but you've got your education offerings, your development offerings, your solutions consultants. So the leads of those teams being interlocked with your missions and with your partners to kind of understand the work that needs to happen there, because it will over-rotate to simply, a sales focus, and then something goes wrong and you're scrambling to educate these other teams around, wait, this partner is actually smart, or this partner is super smart, but we've underserved them, or you didn't know that they existed and where all of their practice folks sit and reside. So we don't know how to leverage them. So I think that's another, it's an important, I think, proactively as partner leaders, just making sure that we recognize the various stakeholders in our internal organization and make sure they're part of that development journey, partner development journey.
Awesome. So I guess I'll end with, and please folks jump in with questions and in the chat box. We've already seen some really good ones come in, but I'd love perhaps if one of you can share a partnership that you're really proud of, right? Because I love hosting these types of forums because I think it's all about celebrating huge wins. So maybe a partnership that you're proud of, but also if anyone is willing to share a time when a partnership maybe wasn't successful and why was it and what you might have learned from it. The other thing too, I'd just like to call out is, I imagine with partnerships, again, it's not just one number. There's lots of different factors into it, but it might just not be worth it, right? It's not that it's not driving something, but again, limited time, limited bandwidth, limited resources. So knowing like, hey, this is just not worth it for us to continue. And when you know that. So maybe we start with the good. If anyone wants to start with the good.
I'll go ahead and start there. So we were, a couple of years ago, we were trying to break into new lines of business within organizations. And it was when the DevOps model was really becoming hot and a lot of customers were looking at that. We tend to have a lot of relationships on the operational side and not so much on the app developer side. And so we realized that in order to get favor with some of these big companies and companies where these lines of business and app developers were becoming the buyers, we had to figure out how to find some new partnerships that would get us that seat at the table and could represent us when we weren't even sitting in the room. And so we started to work with some services companies. We call them digital solutions integrators at Cisco, and they're basically services only companies. And so through that, we found that they were able to go in, have a very different conversation and talk about how what they were doing and how Cisco could really benefit their app development process. And so through that, we were able to, really unlock some awesome customer opportunities. And in exchange, it gave them a different seat at the table, because not only were they able to go in and talk about kind of the operational and strategy discussion, but they were also now able to give suggestions on companies they could work with to actually deploy this and implement, this new model. And where it made sense and they referred us, we were able to provide them a referral fee. So I would say that's one of the most successful and kind of out of the box that we investigated.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Yeah, that really is like a total new paradigm, right? Like you historically just have not previously tackled that world, and to be able to just like create a new universe, I know must have been a ton of work. So congrats on that. Okay, that means Julia and Terry have to answer one of my hard questions then.
I've got it. I've got a softball so that we can kind of avoid implication if I can. So I also worked at SAP, and so I was thinking about how I could. And so at all companies I've worked for, and I would suggest, I bet Jennifer and Terry, we've all got examples of partnering gone bad.
Yeah.
For me, it falls into, in every instance, if I think about it, and I use this actually current company recently, and if everyone knows of SAP, would you buy SAP at Best Buy? And that's ridiculous. You can't go to Best Buy to pick up some SAP software.
That must be the line of today's entire forum, by the way. That's going to be the line that's tweeted. Would you buy SAP?
But no, you're not. But it's not because it's because they don't. That doesn't make a
wrong channel, right?
Right. From a go-to-market perspective, those aren't the partners that SAP is looking for, and frankly, it's not the product that Best Buy is looking to put on their shelves. And the reverse is true. I mean, I'm not going to call up Accenture and have them help me out, loading apps on my iPhone. So that's where I've seen partnering go bad, is where your go-to-market motion, that your company goals, priorities, your product, your service isn't lined up with your partners. You're not targeting the same audience. You're not targeting the same distribution models, that kind of thing.
I would say I would totally echo that. The other place I've seen it fail is when we try to force our agenda on a partner. So we have a partner who is a good partner in many ways, for many products, for many offerings, but we say, hey, we really need you to sell this too. And it's not really in their wheelhouse. It's not really what they want to sell, but we're like, well, and we throw money at them. We say, oh, well, we're going to give you, 10% of every, whatever. It doesn't help. It doesn't work. If they're not, and it's really the same problem that Julia is describing, right? But
giving Best Buy 10% of the SAP.
Yeah, giving Best Buy 50% of the sale wouldn't change the outcome, right? They're still not going to sell any SAP. So I've definitely, that's usually when it fails, is when you're pushing on a rope, right? When you're trying to do something that isn't a synergistic, strategically aligned, like the right, partnership model.
That's really helpful to hear. And I think the question really then is too, like, you can do all the training you want. You can do all the sales enablement you want. Right. And I imagine there's times when you've really said, maybe we should just do more training. Maybe that will fix the issue. Right. But it sounds like, at least based on some of that doesn't always fix it. Maybe the last question I'll ask is how do you know when it's do you give it 2 quarters? Right. Do you give it a year? When do you know?
I think before it starts, and you just try to talk yourself into it. That's my personal opinion, but
awesome. That's really helpful. Okay, so we have a great question. I don't know, Ava, are you around? Do you she's the co-founder of a great company called Simba. She has a great question in chat. I don't know if you want to hop off mute and ask a question. No pressure. I can also ask the question as well.
Absolutely. I'm happy to chime in. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us. We have quite a few revenue sharing partners. We actually have about 22, but only 2 of them have led to incredible sales. And actually 60% of our sales are from these partners. And I'd love to hear about different ways that we could share revenue. I know there was mention of a referral fee. So would love to get your thoughts on how we can map that out with future partners.
Well, I mean, there are a ton of different programs that you can run with partners, right? Revenue share is one. We certainly use that model in some cases. Um, we have market development funds, which I think anybody who's worked in partners and alliances is familiar with. It would take me another couple of calls to explain it all, but there is funding available that we can either allocate to a partner based on the transactions that they do, or based on some other criteria, right? MDF is kind of however you want to define it. There are referral fees. There's program status even sometimes. I mean, I find that, again, if the partnership is well aligned, the incentives are almost, not that the partner doesn't appreciate them, but that's not going to drive the behavior. If the partnership's well aligned, it will drive, and the incentives are kind of table stakes, right? Because that's kind of what our industry does. I don't know, Julia or Jennifer, if you feel differently, but.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I get back to coupons. I mean, I don't, if you think about rebate, all of these incentives, or if going back to olden days, as my kids talking about, like the olden days when there were these things called coupons, and you bought the things you were going to buy anyway, you just got it. So I think it's, if you're trying to push on a rope, as Jennifer said, if the partnership isn't right to begin with, all the incentives in the world, aren't going to make it productive for both parties. So I'd say if you're struggling with your partner ecosystem's productivity, I would look at the partners you have in your ecosystem first and make sure that they're well aligned to your go-to-market strategies are well aligned. So start there. And then in terms of what motivates them, that's a conversation with them to talk about, we're going to give you a coupon. That's great. We don't really want a coupon. What we'd really like is more training, more help with our practice development. So.
Yeah, the last thing I would, share, as Julia and Terry mentioned, there's a lot of different programs out there, and at the end of the day, it comes down to what's valuable to that partner, and what's going to move the needle with them. One thing we have looked at is and leveraged are, looking at investments in the partnership, and then, Julia had mentioned building that funnel and how do we drive the right behaviors on the front end to help create the revenue, the pipeline and revenue opportunity. And so that might be something that you can consider is like, what behavior, if we're going to sit down and partner, what, again, as we talked about, a lot of people have to participate in that motion. Not everyone's going to be as excited and energized as you. So what behavior do we have to really try to go drive with the field and these partners and the different organizations within the partners? And how do we put maybe an incentive in place to go drive those behaviors, which we hope will ultimately, turn into pipeline and revenue ultimately. So kind of like a performance-based investment to stimulate the motions that you want to drive with the partnership.
Awesome. Any other questions, everyone? Please throw in chat. But I will end on this last one then, which is just, with advice, what is something you wish someone had told you earlier in your partnerships career? And we can go around the horn. So maybe Julia, do you want to kick off?
It's harder to go, and this is that I think it's an African proverb, but you're going to go further, but you're not going to go faster. So partnerships are complex. So when there's give yourself some time and grace. I've got some new team members that started last quarter and were frustrated that they weren't on their board and their partner wasn't. These are relationships you're establishing. You've got ramp for AEs. There's a ramp for partner business development. You're developing. You're working on a co-business development strategy with somebody. They take time. So there's some grace, to yourself and amongst your teams, and so to your executive team. To have very productive, Jim Collins flywheels, that flywheel effect, to have a productive flywheel, it takes some investment to get it going. I'd say that's something that I've had to learn the hard way, being a bit impatient about success.
Yeah. And I'm sure everyone on the call is like, why isn't this partnership working yet? Right. So that, I think that is such helpful advice and just a good reminder. Jennifer.
Yeah, I think it kind of ties into what Julia shared. Don't make assumptions. I think it's really easy to try to assume what's important to a partner and what's going to make them tick and what they're concerned about. And it can change and evolve as the world changes and evolves. And I think we saw that really clearly with the pandemic. So don't assume, and just be curious and ask a lot of questions, and take that time up front to get to know your partner, because the longer you kind of wait to do that, they're at some point they're gonna be like, you should have known that about me by now, right? So really just making sure you are investing that time up front to ask a lot of questions and get clarity on what matters to them.
Awesome. And Terry?
I think it's going to be along the same lines, but it's really important. It's all about expectations and delivery. That's what partnership is about. No different than any relationship that you have, right? So I had a guy that worked for me once, and he told me this story, and I loved it. He had a wife that stayed at home. They had like a lot of kids, and she's like, you got to get milk. And he ran out to get milk, and he came home and he had bought her a brand new Cadillac. And he was so upset that she was not excited about the new car, but he didn't bring the milk. And she was like, I needed the milk, right? So that's a silly story, but it illustrates the point that Jennifer was making, I think, as well, that partnership is all about expectation and delivery. You really have to understand what do you expect from that partner? What are they expecting from you? And are you delivering on those key elements for each other?
Yeah, between the Cadillac and the coupons, I mean, we've got some really interesting transactions going on. Okay, is it Tisha? Tisha, do you want to ask your first question? I don't know if you want to come off mute. Otherwise,
sorry, I don't.
Sorry,
Can you hear me?
can you hear us? Yeah.
All right. So I actually work for Julia, so I'm really inspired to be on the conversation, and it's been a great conversation and insight from all three leaders on the call here. So determine the ROI on a partnership, how valuable a partnership is to you. So you're able to focus your energies, and given the limited resources that you might have in a startup, based on the kind of investment talks about.
I think we might have lost you. So I might just jump in and finish the question then. Well, you actually asked 2 great questions, and we talked a little bit in the start about determining ROI. So I'll actually jump to your other question if that's okay, which is, how do you determine if a partner qualifies for introducing a referral fee to their sales program? I like this question because it's very tactical, and I think maybe others are also wondering. We talked about the referral fee a little bit earlier too.
Trying to make sure I understand it. So if they should be able to participate in a referral?
Yeah, I think that's what it means.
Okay. So it kind of goes back to, I mean, for us, what we've done in the past, we've got different ways of which we do this is, it really goes back to like a performance-based investment or referral program. So a referral typically has to happen where the field team is saying, yes, this partner brought me into this customer. They did these 3 things, set up a meeting with the customer. They joined us in a joint presentation demo around our technology. And I don't know, they set up a customer briefing at our executive center. So it's usually, we typically have it where the field team has to agree, and there's some checks and balances there just to make sure that the field team's being fair, but then also looking at how did they perform, are there certain things that they did to help us actually get into and win that deal.
Awesome. That's so helpful. I think just hearing even step by step some of these concrete examples